All right. Well, Kohlberg believed that we reach our fullest moral reasoning level with puberty, just like Piaget thought. Remember, Kohlberg was a student of Piaget and took this little twist where he's like, well, I think that moral reasoning is a function of cognitive development. So far we've already been through stages 1 through 4 of cognitive development, and the impression I've given you so far is that middle childhood is when you're involved in stages 3 and 4. So I'm going to stick with what Kohlberg said, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about what research has shown about this. All right, so the post-conventional level of reasoning is what Kohlberg says we enter when we reach puberty. So first off, we enter stage 5, which is where we recognize that we exist within a social contract, that there are rules and there are laws, and that as members of society, we're supposed to follow those because that's what we've all agreed to do. It doesn't really matter if they're right or wrong per se, in the sense that it is part of the social contract when we are at stage 5. And this can be true like at a societal kind of law and order thing. It could be that the person's considering the rules at school. It could be the rules of being friends with this friend group. There's a social contract, and if you want to be part of the society that whatever we're talking about, then you need to follow these rules because that we've all agreed to it. Stage 6 is where we emerge into this understanding of universal principles that may go beyond what the law is. So, even beyond the fact that we've all agreed that we exist within a society and we all should follow the laws because that's the social contract. Stage 6 reasoners will say, okay, there are certain things that might be legal, but they're wrong, or illegal, and they're fine. That it's not really just about whether society as a group has all decided that this is okay. Some things are the law that are actually, unethical and shouldn't be the law. And so once you get to stage 6, you start to think in those ways and start to consider things on the, sort of bigger picture. Is it objectively right or wrong? Now, I just want to say there's no such thing as objectively right or wrong. It's your own perception of it based on your experiences, your reasoning, your, all these things. So what might be a universally correct thing to do for one person might be a universally, no one should do that to another person, right? So people it's not like you finally get to a point in Kohlberg's moral ladder where everybody agrees or something like that. That doesn't happen. It's really you arguing to yourself or to others that certain principles are sacrosanct and you are confident what they are. Now, the reason why I left stages 3 and 4 still colorized, whereas 1 and 2 I have in gray, is that in reality, adolescence can be in any one of these 4 stages at any given moment in adolescence. You'll notice that adolescence is the period of time when people are the most likely to conform to try and please others, right? Stage 3, the peer group is so powerful. If you've ever seen the movie The Breakfast Club, they talk about how, you don't understand how my friends are, our friends are so powerful and we have to do what they want us to do. That's a very stage 3 thing to say, right? Like, I'll be cast out and not be part of the group if I don't go along. And so I must, I want to please other people. In stage 3, I put good person there, but a person who's other people look up to would be part of stage 3. So popularity would be driven, the desire for popularity would be driven by stage 3 reasoning. In stage 4, it's the law, it's the order, it's the rules. You can see this in adolescence where people will, follow the speed limit, or they don't text and drive because they know that it's against the law, not because they understand why it's against the law. They just know that they shouldn't be doing it. By stage 5, there's a social contract, and so like this driver who's texting and driving should be aware that, I've got other people's lives that I've got to consider also, not just the convenience of me communicating with somebody via text right now. And we all have sort of agreed that we're supposed to drive and pay attention, and we're all doing that. So if that person decided to put down his phone, it would be because he's realizing, oh, you know what, the convenience of me texting right now violates the social contract that we all agreed to, and could put it down. Or the universal principle of, basically if you've taking responsibility for driving a 5,000-pound vehicle at 70 miles an hour on a highway. It is your responsibility to make sure that you are not drunk, you're not high, you're not distracted. Like a reasonable human being would take that very seriously and would pay attention while driving. Like, that's the logic of the universal principles. But let's go through these stages and talk about specifically texting and driving, and talk about it through the different stages and the sort of reasoning that a person might give to justify why they are texting and driving. So let's say that a person is texting and driving, and they're at stage 1 logic. They might say, well, if I don't respond to my mom's texts within a certain amount of time, she gets really mad at me, and I don't want her to get mad at me, so I'm going to reply even though I'm driving. So the person's trying to avoid punishment by engaging in this behavior that's risky. I would like to argue that if mom knew that you were replying while driving, she'd probably get even madder. But anyway, adolescent logic. Stage 2 might be seeking rewards. Like, maybe the person is texting because if they don't respond within a certain amount of time, then they are going to miss their chance to get, the tickets to the show, or they're going to, miss out on getting to go with their friends to some event or something that's rewarding to them. So it's worth taking the risk and possibly doing something unethical like texting and driving, because what they'll get from it is a reward of some sort. And of course, we're assuming nothing bad's going to happen. Stage 3, they may be texting because they're trying to please other people, right? Like, maybe they don't want their boyfriend or girlfriend to be upset that it's taking too long to reply. So they're responding because they want to be a good person and please their romantic interest, who, again, I'd like to argue might be mad if they found out that you were texting and driving. But anyway. Stage 4, I'm trying to think of a law and order explanation for why you might be texting. Oh, maybe I just saw an accident and I'm texting it to 911. Yeah. I was trying to be helpful. I don't know if that's the greatest excuse, but stage 5, it gets even harder to justify texting and driving if you're at stage 5 logic, because anything you could say about there being some kind of social contract would be superseded by the social contract of not driving distracted. So I almost feel like I have to flip and start saying, why would I explain why I am not responding to your texts? Well, I'm not responding to your text because I'm driving, and it's against the law to text and drive. Or because, we live in a social contract where we're all supposed to know to put our phones down when we're driving. Or the universal principle of not driving distractedly. So it's kind of harder to justify something that would be so potentially harmful using stage 4 through 6 logic. I mean, it's hard for me to even think of a good example of why it would be okay to text and drive under those latter 4 principles. But that's the premise, that, just because you've reached a certain level of maturation doesn't mean that you're always going to be in stage 6. You're going to sometimes make self-serving decisions. And Kohlberg thought you would move through in an orderly fashion and land at universal principles. But what researchers have found is that people bounce around depending on what the subject matter is. You're like, what's more pressing? I mean, if you recently have gotten a speeding ticket and, one more and they're going to drop you off of the insurance, you're going to get very stage 1 about the speed that you're traveling because you don't want to lose your privilege to drive or lose your insurance, right? So we kind of hop around like that. It's not like you make a linear trip into universal principles. The final thing I'll say about Kohlberg's moral ladder is, again, like his colleague, Piaget, he was probably a little overly optimistic about people entering post-conventional morality in adolescence. He was probably a little bit too sunshiny about that. So his model ends here, but we're going to talk about moral development more as we talk about, merging adulthood and adulthood proper. Okay, let's talk a little bit about secondary school. That would be middle school and high school. Some of you might have gone to schools where you were in the same school from kindergarten through 8th, or maybe even K through 12, same school. But for a lot of people, the most common pattern is to have, elementary school, middle school, high school kind of structure. One of the things that is really important for high school, for school achievement in middle school and high school is how much parents are really helping to keep the kids on task as far as keeping up with their homework and their writing assignments and other things that really blossom in middle and high school. So parental interest is really important. And then parenting style helps to really moderate that parent's interest. For most American kids, the research has shown that it's the authoritative style where the parents help them to be good reasoners and have rules that are specific and have very specific punishments when the child doesn't follow the rules, stuff like that. That seems to be the best strategy for most kids in the U.S. It turns out that that's true for Asian American kids too, but Asian American kids seem to flourish just as well, even if their parents display an authoritarian stance. So whereas other racial and ethnic groups don't necessarily do as well if their parents are very authoritarian, they may rebel. But Asian kids are less likely to rebel, Asian American kids. So it's, Asian American kids do okay with authoritative and authoritarian. Other racial and ethnic groups tend to only benefit from authoritative. So the biggest, most dramatic thing that happens is the transition to a new school. For most, like I said, most kids, it's going to be something like the first 6 grades are together, then the next 3, and then the last 3. But it might be more of a first 6 grades, then 2 years of middle school and 4 years of high school. Or in the school district where my kids went to school, it was the first 5th grade, 1st through 5th, and then it was 6th through 8th, and then it was 9th through 10th, or 9th through 12th. I mean, different schools have different patterns, but what you'll notice is that for most kids in the U.S., they have to change schools at least once during their educational career. And the effects of those transitions are tough. We see bigger effects for girls transitioning into middle school than we do for boys at any age group. And it might be because the transition to middle school oftentimes lays right exactly on top of puberty for girls, whereas boys are more likely to complete puberty while they're in middle school, and then they move up to the high school having already completed puberty. So it might be partly that, because there are just all these changes going on for girls that may not be going on for boys. So we see some gender-related effects, and then we see some school-related effects. It turns out that the systems that require the least transition between schools tend to fare the best. So if you can be in a school district where kids get to go to the same school through 8th grade, for example, that's better than having them change, every 3 years or something. The schools that are going to 5th grade as the top grade in elementary school are making the argument that kids are entering puberty earlier, and it has been better for the younger kids to move the older kids into middle school earlier, but then that puts the older kids into contact with even older kids sooner. And so there's sort of a behavioral issue that goes along with that. And altogether, because of this transition of puberty and stuff like that, what we see is that kids' focus on the academics really declines in middle and high school on average. Not everybody. Some kids are really super academically focused. But for the average kid, we see a lot of focus on social things and, I'll say sexual things, right? Because there's a lot of, finding out whether anybody else is attracted to us and these kinds of things that are going on during middle and high school that can really take away attention from the academics. There's good news about that, though. We're seeing a really dramatic decline in dropout rates, especially among Hispanic Americans, but all the other racial groups also. There's been this decline over the past, 25 years of high school dropout. People are really staying in school a lot more reliably and graduating. And, we talked about this before, that's a really good setup for being able to make more money in the long run, have more stable careers, more stable family life. All these things come from being able to finish high school. So this is really good news. So I wanted to end on a happy note and show you that, kids are not dropping out at the rate that they once did. All right, I'm going to stop here, and in the next set, we'll talk about social development in adolescence. So I'll see you then.